Welcome back to the shadows, dear viewers. You've stumbled upon a collection of tales that will make you think twice before wandering off trail. Today, we ventured deep into Oregon's dense forests, where 12 groups of hikers encountered something they never expected to find nestled among the ancient trees: abandoned hospitals with corridors that whisper secrets best left forgotten. Prepare yourself as we count down these 12 encounters with the medical facilities that nature tried to reclaim, but horror refused to release. Darkness in Ward 7 always felt different. Denser, more alive, like it was breathing alongside the patients, waiting for midnight when the screams would begin. Nurse Eliza Chun had worked the night shift at Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital for 3 years, but nothing prepared her for what happened on October 17th, when the screams from Ward 7 weren't just expressions of mental anguish, they were warnings. The staff dismissed them as psychotic episodes, but Eliza noticed a pattern. Every patient who screamed at midnight would be found dead within a week, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Rain pelted against the Victorian windows of Blackwood Hospital, a converted mansion that stood like a sentinel against the mountainside. The original wing, built in 1887, housed Ward 7, reserved for the most severe cases of paranoid schizophrenia and psychosis. The hospital administration had tried twice to renovate it, but construction crews refused to continue after experiencing what they described as a crushing weight on their chests whenever they worked past sunset. Medical equipment malfunctioned regularly, medications went missing, and patient charts would be found altered in the morning with bizarre symbols drawn in the margins. Eliza's colleagues called her paranoid when she started documenting the pattern. Mental health facilities are full of coincidences, Dr. Whitaker had said dismissively. But she knew something was wrong when patient Jamie Keller began screaming about the shadow doctor who visited during rounds. "He wears a black coat," Jamie had whispered to Eliza, "and he carries a bag of teeth." 3 days later, Jamie was found dead, his body contorted into an impossible position, his eyes completely white as though the pupils had retreated into his skull. The hospital records Eliza uncovered revealed a thread of darkness woven through Blackwood's history. In 1902, a doctor named Edwin Blackwood conducted experimental treatments on patients with severe mental disorders. His methods were radical: surgical interventions into the brain, chemical compounds that induced controlled terror, and isolation techniques that would be considered torture by today's standards. The most disturbing detail was his theory that extreme fear could purge the mind of madness, that terror itself could be medicinal if administered properly. As Eliza dug deeper, she discovered a pattern in the deaths. They occurred in 7-day cycles, always starting with a midnight scream from Ward 7. The victims' autopsies showed no cause of death, except for unusual brain activity consistent with extreme terror. Their amygdalas, the fear centers of the brain, had essentially burned out, as though they had experienced something so terrifying that their minds simply stopped functioning. What haunted Eliza wasn't just the deaths, but the expressions left on their faces, a kind of horror that transcended what humans should be capable of experiencing. Security camera footage from Ward 7 revealed nothing unusual, except for odd moments of static precisely at midnight. During these glitches, the temperature in the ward dropped by 15 degrees. Eliza had felt it herself, the sudden cold that settled over the ward like a burial shroud, bringing with it the faint smell of ether and copper, reminiscent of old operating rooms. The rational part of her mind sought explanations: faulty wiring, air conditioning malfunctions, group hysteria among unstable patients. But these explanations crumbled when she found Dr. Blackwood's journals hidden in a sealed wall cavity during routine maintenance. The final pages of Blackwood's journal detailed his ultimate experiment, an attempt to extract pure fear as a physical essence. "Fear is the most potent medicine," he wrote, "and I have found a way to distill it into its purest form." The journal ended abruptly after describing a procedure scheduled for midnight on October 17, 1902, exactly 120 years before the current cycle of deaths began. The last entry simply read, "They will not let me leave. My patients have become my wardens. But I will return when the barrier thins. Fear will be my vessel." After reading the journal, Eliza began experiencing the dreams. Each night, she found herself walking through Ward 7 as it existed a century ago. At the end of the corridor stood a figure in a black physician's coat from another era, his medical bag dripping with what looked like black oil. He never spoke, but she understood his intentions as clearly as if he had whispered them directly into her mind. He needed new subjects, and the barrier between his time and hers was weakening. Most disturbing of all, he knew her name and had been waiting for someone like her to notice his work. The ancient oak creaked beneath Eliza's feet as she made her nightly rounds through Ward 7. Something about tonight felt different, heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of anticipation. 17 patients occupied the ward, each trapped in private battles against demons both real and imagined. Or perhaps, Eliza thought, the line between those categories was thinner than medical science acknowledged. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, each second pulsing like a countdown to something inevitable. Patient Mira Oakes sat upright in bed as Eliza approached, her eyes reflecting the dim hallway light like an animal's. "He's choosing tonight," Mira whispered, her fingers twisting her blanket into rope-like cords. "He's choosing which one gets to see what waits on the other side." Mira had been admitted 6 months ago after attempting to remove her own eyes, claiming they were contaminated by what they had witnessed at her job as a night cleaner at the City Museum. Typically nonverbal, her sudden articulation sent ice through Eliza's veins. Dr. Whitaker had assigned a new medication protocol for Ward 7, insisting the midnight disturbances were simply a form of contagious psychosis. The fresh prescriptions sat like small white promises in Eliza's medication cart, promises of dreamless sleep and quiet minds. Yet something about Whitaker had changed in recent weeks. His clinical detachment had intensified into something colder, and Eliza had twice caught him in Ward 7 after hours, standing motionless in the corridor, staring at the walls as though listening for something inside them. The journal Eliza had discovered contained detailed anatomical drawings of the human brain with specific regions highlighted: the amygdala, the hippocampus, the temporal lobe. Dr. Blackwood had mapped what he called fear pathways, neural connections that activated during extreme terror. But the most disturbing illustrations showed these pathways extending beyond the physical brain, reaching into a space Blackwood labeled the void between. His notes suggested that extreme fear created temporary bridges to somewhere else, and that something waited on the other side of those bridges, hungry for connection. Hospital Administrator Thomas Reed dismissed Eliza's concerns when she brought him the journal and death records. Blackwood Psychiatric has treated mentally ill patients for over a century, he said with practiced patience. Death is an unfortunate reality in facilities like ours. But his eyes never met hers, and his hands trembled slightly as he returned the journal. Later that day, Eliza discovered that Reed had ordered all historical records of the hospital sealed in the archive room, which had been inexplicably flooded the following morning, destroying decades of documentation. Eliza began interviewing hospital staff who had witnessed the midnight episodes, compiling their experiences despite growing resistance from administration. Night janitor Walter Keene described shadows that moved independently of their sources. "They crawl up the walls at midnight," he said, his weathered face grave. "Been seeing it for 20 years. Those shadows ain't cast by anything in our world." Kitchen worker Maria Delgado refused to deliver meals to Ward 7, claiming the food would spoil instantly when brought through its doors. "Like time moves different in there," she explained. "Like something's eating the freshness right out of things." As midnight approached, Eliza felt a familiar pressure building in her ears, as though she were descending deep underwater. The lights in Ward 7 flickered, once, twice, before stabilizing at a dimmer intensity. Patient monitors registered elevated heart rates across all rooms simultaneously, their synchronization defying medical explanation. Outside, clouds obscured the moon as the hospital seemed to hold its breath. The old grandfather clock at the end of the hall ticked its final seconds toward midnight, its pendulum swinging with ponderous certainty, marking the threshold where one day surrendered to another, and perhaps where one world momentarily touched the next. The midnight screams began precisely as the clock finished its final toll, but tonight they carried words rather than just inarticulate terror. "The doctor is coming through," they called in chilling unison. And as Eliza watched, her blood freezing in her veins, the air in the center of Ward 7's main corridor began to ripple like the surface of disturbed water. Within that ripple, a doorway was forming, and something dressed in the black clothes of a Victorian physician was stepping through, medical bag in hand, ready to continue experiments interrupted a century before. Eliza realized with horror that the patients weren't the subjects in this experiment. They were the doorway, and she had just helped open it. The leather-bound journal, weathered by time, rested on the dusty shelf of Dr. Malcolm Harper's abandoned office. For 60 years, the logbook remained untouched, its pages yellowed but intact, containing secrets that would forever change our understanding of medical history. When archivist Elena Winters discovered it while cataloging items for the university's historical collection, she had no idea she was about to uncover one of the most disturbing medical experiments ever conducted, one that began in 1943 at Rose Hill Psychiatric Hospital. The first entry was dated April 17, 1943. Dr. Harper's handwriting, precise and slanted, detailed his arrival at Rose Hill, a sprawling Victorian institution nestled among rolling hills 50 miles from Boston. His words painted a grim picture: overcrowded wards, patients sedated into submission, and treatments that seemed medieval rather than medical. But beneath his clinical observations ran an undercurrent of excitement. Harper had come with purpose, to test his revolutionary theory about human consciousness and its connection to pain. What makes the logbook so chilling isn't just what it contains, but how Harper's entries evolve. The early pages show a dedicated physician, convinced his work would save lives. "Pain is merely information misinterpreted by the brain," he wrote. "If we can sever this connection, imagine the suffering we could alleviate." His initial subjects were soldiers returning from the European front, men whose bodies had been broken but whose minds Harper believed he could save. The military had quietly funded his research, desperate for solutions to the growing crisis of shell-shocked veterans. By June 1943, Harper had assembled a team of 5 nurses and 2 junior physicians who shared his vision. Together, they converted the hospital's East Wing into what they called the Quiet Ward. Patients selected for Harper's program disappeared behind those doors, their official records amended to show transfer to other facilities or, in some cases, unexpected death. In reality, they became unwitting pioneers in Harper's experimental landscape, a cruel playground where the boundaries between medicine and torture blurred beyond recognition. The procedures described in the logbook defy modern medical ethics. Harper began with drugs, experimental compounds that targeted specific neural pathways. When pharmaceuticals failed to provide the results he sought, he turned to surgical interventions. Subject 17 shows promising response, reads an entry from September. After removal of the prefrontal connection, pain stimuli produce no emotional response. He acknowledges the presence of pain, but experiences no suffering. The cold precision of Harper's notes masks the horror of what he was actually documenting, the systematic dismantling of human emotional responses. Winter turned slowly to spring, and Harper's entries grew longer, more personal. He wrote less about his patients and more about his dreams, describing visions where he walked through corridors of minds he had fixed. His handwriting, once immaculate, became irregular, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence only to resume with frenzied clarity. The doctor was changing, shaped by his own experiments as surely as his patients were. Something was happening in the quiet ward that extended beyond simple medical research. By December 1943, Harper had performed procedures on 23 patients. Of these, 8 had died during or shortly after surgery. The others existed in states Harper struggled to define. "They are present without presence," he wrote. "Conscious without consciousness." His notes describe patients who could function, eat, walk, speak, but seemed disconnected from themselves, as if viewing life through fogged glass. And yet, Harper considered this a success. In his mind, these hollow shells represented freedom from the prison of pain. What Harper couldn't have anticipated was how the absence of suffering would affect his subjects' behavior. By early 1944, incidents began occurring in the quiet ward. Patient 12 attacked a nurse with unprecedented violence, showing no emotional reaction even when subdued with considerable force. Patient 8 systematically self-mutilated, cutting intricate patterns into her own skin without flinching. These weren't acts of aggression or desperation as Harper had seen in other psychiatric patients. They were something else entirely, actions taken without the governing influence of consequence or feeling. The final pages of the first section of Harper's logbook detail his growing fascination with patient 4, a former mathematics professor named Edward Lowell. Unlike the others, Lowell retained his intellectual capabilities after the procedure, engaging Harper in philosophical discussions about the nature of humanity. "Lowell asked me today if I considered him still human," Harper wrote. "I find myself unable to answer." The doctor's last entry from this period ends abruptly. Lowell suggested an experiment today. He wants me to understand what I've created. I believe I should. The next 10 pages had been torn out. What experiment had Lowell proposed? And why did Harper's documentation suddenly cease? The middle section of Harper's logbook resumes after an 8-week gap, during which no entries were made. When his writing returns, something fundamental has changed. Gone is the clinical detachment, replaced by handwriting that trembles across the page. "I understand now," Harper writes. "God forgive me, I understand." The doctor had become both researcher and subject, though the exact nature of what happened remained shrouded between the missing pages, like a body beneath burial sheets. Harper describes how his absence was explained to hospital administrators as a bout of pneumonia. In reality, he had subjected himself to a modified version of his own procedure, one that didn't eliminate pain entirely but altered his perception of it. The experience transformed him. Pain remained, but disconnected from fear, from self-preservation instincts. The sensation became merely data, stripped of emotional significance. This separation, Harper realized, didn't free his patients as he'd intended. Instead, it untethered them from their humanity. The experiments continued, but with a shifted focus. Harper began searching for ways to reverse what he had done, working frantically as if racing against some unseen deadline. His notes from this period contain detailed drawings, brain structures mapped with meticulous care, electrical impulse patterns charted on grid paper that stretched across multiple pages. The military continued funding his work, though their interest seemed focused on applications Harper no longer mentioned. Letters attached to the logbook suggest officials saw potential in creating soldiers who could function through catastrophic injury, who wouldn't break under torture. By summer 1944, Harper had refined his technique, performing increasingly precise surgeries. Patient 31, a woman identified only as Margaret, became his primary case study. Unlike earlier subjects, Margaret retained emotional responses to everything except physical pain. She could laugh at jokes, feel sorrow at sad news, but when Harper tested her pain responses, tests described with disturbing thoroughness, she demonstrated complete dissociation. She watches the needle enter her skin with the same expression she might use observing a cloudy day, Harper wrote. Margaret's condition deteriorated in unexpected ways. While physically she healed normally, her personality underwent subtle fracturing. She began reporting dreams of floating above her body, watching herself move through the hospital. Sometimes, she claimed to visit other patients' rooms, describing details she couldn't possibly know. Harper, now more philosopher than physician, filled pages with speculations about consciousness existing separately from physical form. Have I not severed pain from body, but body from soul? One entry asks plaintively. Hospital staff avoided the quiet ward, claiming it felt cold even on summer days. That sounds echoed strangely there, as if traveling from far away. Nurses requested transfers after reporting unsettling experiences, patients speaking in unison without apparent awareness, lights flickering in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Harper documented these occurrences with increasing interest, connecting them to his evolving theory that consciousness, when tampered with, might manifest in unexpected ways. In autumn 1944, 3 patients died in a single week. Harper's entries about these deaths contain none of the clinical distance of his earlier work. He describes holding their hands as they passed, whispering apologies they couldn't comprehend. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like stones piled on a grave. Yet he continued, driven by the desperate belief that he could undo his mistakes, that redemption waited in the next procedure, the next breakthrough. The military grew impatient. Letters from Harper's superiors demanded demonstrable results, threatening to withdraw funding. Harper's responses, copied meticulously into the logbook, became increasingly evasive. He was playing for time, knowing his research had veered far from its intended purpose. I am no longer creating soldiers, he confided to his journal. I am trying to restore what makes us human. Patient 4, Edward Lowell, remained Harper's confidant and collaborator, despite, or perhaps because of, his altered state. Together they developed a new procedure, one designed not to separate consciousness from pain but to reintegrate them. In November 1944, Harper tested this procedure on patient 19, a young man who had been among the first subjects. The results were catastrophic. He remembered everything, Harper wrote, words pressed so deeply into the paper they nearly tore through. Every moment of pain we had hidden from him returned at once. No human mind could withstand such an assault. The death of patient 19 marked a turning point. Military officials arrived unannounced, intending to review Harper's work directly. What they found in the quiet ward led to an immediate quarantine of the entire East Wing. Harper's final entries become fragmented, describing patients exhibiting synchronized behaviors without direction, speaking of shared dreams where they walked together through endless hospital corridors. Margaret, still Harper's primary subject, began predicting events before they occurred, small things at first, then with unsettling accuracy. The logbook's last dated entry is February 12, 1945. In it, Harper describes how Lowell suggested a final experiment, connecting all remaining patients in a procedure Harper had theorized but never attempted. We have fractured consciousness itself, Harper wrote. Now we must see if it can be reunited, not within individual minds, but across them. The pages that follow contain calculations, surgical plans, and a list of 13 patient names. Below this, Harper penned what appears to be his conclusion. Tomorrow we remake what we unmade. May God have mercy on us all for what we've learned. The final pages contain no writing, only a series of drawings that become increasingly abstract, spiraling patterns that neurologists who've examined the logbook suggest may represent brain activity or electrical patterns. Or perhaps they represent something else entirely, the visual language of a mind that had glimpsed something beyond conventional understanding. The logbook ends there, but Rosehill's records indicate that on February 13, 1945, a catastrophic fire destroyed the hospital's East Wing. No patients or staff survived. The official explanation cited electrical failure, but sealed military documents recovered decades later hint at a deliberate containment action. Harper's body was never identified among the remains. The logbook, somehow removed before the fire, represents the only comprehensive record of what transpired in the quiet ward. In the decades since, periodic reports have emerged from towns near the former hospital site, accounts of patients seen walking the grounds at night, moving in perfect synchrony. Visitors describe inexplicable cold spots and the sensation of being observed by multiple presences simultaneously. Most disturbing are reports from individuals who've spent the night nearby, who speak of shared dreams, wherein they walk hospital corridors, guided by a doctor and 13 patients, all searching for something they've collectively lost. Rose Hill was demolished in 1967, replaced by a shopping complex that has struggled to retain tenants. Each business that fails reports the same complaints: unexplained equipment malfunctions, customers describing sudden invasive thoughts not their own, and an overwhelming sense of being judged by unseen observers. Perhaps most telling is what happens to those who spend significant time in the building. They report diminished emotional responses to physical discomfort, as if something in that place continues Harper's work, separating pain from those who experience it, like a tide pulling swimmers ever deeper into unknown waters. Forgotten corner of Millbrook County, where the forest encroaches on abandoned industrial zones, stands the Hartwick Power Station, a concrete monolith left to decay when the newer nuclear facility opened 40 miles south. Its windows are shattered eyes, its walls canvas for decades of graffiti. Yet something about this place remains unervingly alive. Local teenagers who break in on dares report the same phenomenon. Deep within the building's bowels, a single generator still hums with electricity, despite the facility being officially decommissioned in 1978. Power company records confirm that no electricity has been supplied to the location for over 40 years. So why does this lone generator continue to run as if someone, or something, needs it to stay alive? The first documented account came from Marcus Whitley, a former maintenance worker who returned to the site in 1984 for a personal photography project on industrial decay. His journal entry, later recovered from his apartment, describes how he followed the faint mechanical thrum to the station's lowest basement level. The sound grew louder as I descended, like a sleeping beast breathing in the dark. When I found it, Generator 3, it was running as smoothly as the day we shut everything down. No power source I could identify. No fuel line connected. Just humming away in perfect isolation, its gauges glowing with an unnatural blue light. Whitley never published his photographs. 3 days after his exploration, he was found in his bathroom, drowned in 6 inches of water with no signs of struggle. County records show that between 1986 and 1997, 7 different inspection teams were sent to investigate the anomaly. Each time, officials reported that the generator had been permanently disabled. Each time, within weeks, the humming would return, detected by urban explorers or security guards patrolling the perimeter. One inspector, Eleanor Reeves, wrote in her final report, "We've cut every cable, drained every fluid reservoir, and removed critical components. It should be physically impossible for this machine to function. Yet it resists our attempts like a patient fighting against death." Reeves requested transfer to another district the following week, citing recurring nightmares in which she felt herself being pulled into the generator's metal housing, her body becoming part of its eternal mechanism. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how the generator's operation seems to correlate with unexplained events in Millbrook. During the 3 documented instances when maintenance crews successfully managed to stop the machine, the county experienced clusters of unexplained phenomena: an outbreak of sleep paralysis affecting hundreds of residents, migratory birds circling endlessly until dropping dead from exhaustion, and electronic devices throughout the region playing the same sequence of numbers through their speakers: 379,379. Then, without human intervention, the generator would restart, and the phenomena would cease as quickly as they had begun. It sits there still, a mechanical heart beating steadily in an abandoned corpse, defying explanation and feeding on something unseen. The local authorities eventually sealed off the lower levels of Hartwick Station in 2002, installing heavy steel doors and placing the site under restricted access. But the humming persists, reverberating through the earth beneath the town like blood pulsing through hidden veins. And those who press their ears against the ground on particularly quiet nights claim They can hear something else beneath the mechanical sounds, whispers in a language no linguistic expert has been able to identify, calling out patient instructions to unseen workers who continue their shifts in a power station that officially employs no one. During the winter of 2005, Professor Diane Calloway from Rainier State University assembled a research team to conduct what would become the most thorough investigation of the Hartwick anomaly. Armed with electromagnetic field detectors, thermal imaging cameras, and environmental sensors, her 6-person team obtained rare permission to spend 5 days inside the sealed facility. Their findings, partially redacted in public records, but later leaked online, paint a disturbing picture of scientific impossibility. The generator, identified as Westinghouse Model D7, manufactured in 1962, showed no signs of mechanical wear despite its constant operation. Its metal housing measured 17 degrees, cooler than the surrounding air rather than warmer, as physics would dictate. And most bizarrely, the energy output readings fluctuated not according to any mechanical pattern, but in perfect synchronization with the lunar cycle. "We're not dealing with a mechanical malfunction or some elaborate hoax," Calloway wrote in her journal on the 3rd night. "This machine isn't just running, it's breathing. It's aware." Her audio recordings from that evening captured the generator's hum-changing pitch when team members approached it, like a dog growling at perceived threats. By the 4th day, 2 researchers had abandoned the project, complaining of intense migraines and the sensation of being observed from inside the generator's housing. The remaining team documented a phenomenon they termed temporal displacement, their watches running at different speeds, depending on their proximity to the machine, with discrepancies of up to 47 minutes over a 12-hour period. The mystery deepened when the team discovered a maintenance logbook wedged behind a control panel. The final entry, dated 3 weeks after the official closure, was written in the shaky handwriting of Night Supervisor Thomas Kirby. "It showed me what it needs. I understand now why it can't stop. God help me, I've connected it to the deeper source. May those who come after forgive what I've done." Historical records confirm that Kirby disappeared the same day, his car found abandoned at Millbrook Harbor with the key still in the ignition. The Coast Guard search yielded nothing, but fishermen reported unusual bioluminescence in the waters for months afterward, forming patterns that marine biologists compared to electrical circuit diagrams. Perhaps most chilling were the calculations Calloway's team derived from their measurements. If their models were correct, the generator wasn't producing electricity, it was containing something. The rhythmic pulses operated like a dampening field, suppressing energies that, according to their instruments, originated not from within the building, but from approximately 200 feet below it. Whatever lay under the Hartwick station was powerful enough that even after decades, the generator's mysterious operation hadn't fully neutralized it. It was, as Calloway's final report concluded, less a generator than a cage of spinning metal and magnetic fields, holding back something that pulses like a heart but exists outside our understanding of biological life. The Calloway expedition ended abruptly on the 5th day when all their equipment simultaneously failed. The team fled the building after witnessing what they could only describe as spatial distortion around the generator, the concrete floor appearing to ripple like water, walls breathing in and out as though the building itself had come alive. Upon their return to the university, 3 team members resigned from their positions and moved away from the state without explanation. Calloway herself continued her research in isolation, growing increasingly paranoid until her disappearance in 2008. Her apartment was found empty except for hundreds of pages of calculations taped to every wall and a single message scrawled across her bedroom ceiling. "It's not containing, it's feeding." In the years since, the Hartwick station has been the subject of numerous paranormal investigations and documentary attempts. None have provided conclusive evidence explaining the generator's operation, though several have captured audio anomalies, rhythmic patterns that audio engineers have compared to breathing or, more unsettlingly, to a form of language. Land surveys commissioned in 2015 revealed something even more perplexing: what appears to be a perfect geometric structure, octagonal in shape, positioned directly beneath the generator room at a depth of 220 feet. No record exists of such construction in the station's architectural plans or in any municipal documentation. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that the generator may be interacting with quantum fields or even maintaining a controlled, thin point between dimensional boundaries. Others suggest more terrestrial explanations, an unknown power source, perhaps geothermal or chemical, feeding the machine through channels not visible to investigators. But these theories fail to account for the pattern of phenomena that occurs when the generator stops, or the impossible longevity of its mechanical components. The truth remains elusive, hidden beneath layers of concrete and bureaucratic obscurity. Meanwhile, Generator 3 continues its eternal vigil, humming to itself in the darkness of a forgotten basement. Its gauges still glow with that peculiar blue light, monitoring something that our instruments can detect but our minds cannot comprehend. And sometimes, when the wind blows from the east across Millbrook County, residents report hearing a low, pulsing tone that seems to vibrate not through the air, but through the ground itself, a reminder that beneath their feet, something ancient and patient remains awake, held at bay by a machine that should have stopped running long ago, but continues its work like a faithful sentinel against the dark. Door slides open with an airtight hiss, revealing what lies beyond, a Spartan room with clinical white walls, bathed in the hum of negative pressure systems. This is Patient Zero's quarantine chamber, a 12 by 12 foot prison designed not to protect its inhabitant, but to shield the outside world from what dwells within. The government facility housing this room exists on no official map, buried 50 feet below the New Mexico desert floor. Few have entered this space. Fewer still have left with their sanity intact. The first recorded visit to Patient Zero occurred on November 17, 2006, when Dr. Eleanor West stepped through that door wearing a Level 4 biohazard suit. The protective gear rustled like autumn leaves as she moved, her breath fogging the clear visor that separated her from what sat waiting in the corner. Patient Zero, a name bestowed not out of convenience but necessity, had been captured 3 days prior after a routine CDC investigation spiraled into something unprecedented. Military officials wouldn't divulge details, but satellite imagery showed a 20-mile quarantine zone suddenly established around a small rural community before all communications went silent. What drive? West documented that day contradicted everything medical science understood about human physiology. Patient Zero's skin rippled with subcutaneous movement, like water disturbed by unseen currents. Their eyes reflected light in ways that shouldn't be possible, splitting ordinary fluorescent illumination into spectrums visible only through specialized equipment. Most disturbing was the patient's voice, not because of what they said, but because spectrographic analysis later revealed frequencies impossible for human vocal cords to produce, embedded beneath audible speech. The observation logs detail a rapid deterioration of standard containment protocols. 3 guards stationed outside the quarantine room reported identical nightmares, dark corridors lined with watching eyes, despite having no contact with each other between shifts. Air filters designed to prevent microbial transmission began collecting an unidentifiable black residue that moved against gravity when not directly observed. The white noise generators installed to prevent acoustic surveillance repeatedly malfunctioned, recording whispered conversations in languages no linguist could identify. Medical tests revealed nothing conclusive. Blood work showed impossible protein structures that reorganized themselves between samples. Tissue biopsies disappeared from locked storage units. Brain scans displayed activity in regions that shouldn't exist in human neuroanatomy. Patient Zero remained cooperative throughout, speaking rarely, but always with unnerving precision about the personal lives of staff members, details they had shared with no one. By December, the first secondary infections appeared. Dr. Lowell Chun, who had drawn blood samples 3 weeks earlier, was found in his on-site quarters, his skin displaying the same subcutaneous rippling. Security footage showed nothing unusual until the moment Chin stood before his bathroom mirror and conversation began, one voice his own, the other emerging from his reflection. He was immediately quarantined, but by then, 2 nurses had already begun showing symptoms. What happened on December 23rd remains heavily redacted in official documents. Power to the facility failed for exactly 7 minutes. Emergency generators activated, but surveillance within Patient Zero's room remained offline for an additional 22 seconds. When visuals returned, Patient Zero sat undisturbed in precisely the same position, but all infected personnel had vanished from their separate quarantine cells. The facility's north wall had been breached from the inside, metal and concrete torn outward as though pushed by immense pressure. The most troubling evidence emerged during the subsequent investigation. Thermographic imaging revealed that Patient Zero's body temperature had dropped to near ambient levels during those missing 22 seconds. More disturbing still, audio enhancement of the surveillance footage captured a single whispered phrase moments before visual recovery. The door swings both ways. No one could determine whether Patient Zero had spoken these words or someone else entirely. The desert froze that night, temperatures plunging to record lows as search teams combed the landscape for the missing infected. They found nothing, not footprints, not body heat signatures, not the disruption of sand that should have shown their passage. It was as though they had simply stepped sideways out of our reality. And perhaps most terrifying of all, Patient Zero smiled for the first time since captivity when told the others had disappeared. New Mexico's winter sky hangs low and threatening over the facility now, stars seemingly closer than they should be. Inside room 12B, Patient Zero continues their silent vigil, waiting for something the observation teams can't comprehend. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, when skeleton crews monitor the feeds, the cameras catch Patient Zero's lips moving in one-sided conversation with empty air. Night falls differently inside room 12B. The artificial lighting never changes, yet shadows stretch and shrink according to rhythms disconnected from the sun's movement. Dr. Maya Patel, who replaced Eleanor West after the December incident, noted this phenomenon in her logs, marking how the darkness pooled beneath Patient Zero regardless of light source positioning. The shadows seemed almost liquid, occasionally extending tendrils that retreated when directly observed. After 3 weeks of observation, Patel began sketching their movements, creating time-lapse maps that revealed disturbing patterns. The shadows formed complex mathematical symbols that repeated with slight variations. The first communication breakthrough came in February. Patient Zero, who had spoken fewer than 50 recorded words in 3 months, suddenly began drawing on the shatterproof observation window using only their fingertip. No marks appeared visible to the naked eye, but under ultraviolet light, intricate diagrams bloomed across the glass, molecular structures unknown to science. When analyzed by the facility's biochemists, these compounds theoretically shouldn't be stable, yet somehow match substances found in the black residue, continuously building up in the ventilation system. "They're coming through the spaces between your thoughts," Patient Zero told Patel during their 7th interview session. The recording captured the words, but spectrographic analysis revealed something alarming. Patient Zero's voice arrived at the microphone microseconds before their lips moved. It was as though the sound existed before its creation. Patel reported dreaming of dark water that night and of hands reaching up from below the surface. The first physical manifestation occurred in March. Security cameras documented a maintenance technician replacing air filters when a portion of the black residue appeared to flow onto his ungloved hand. The substance vanished beneath his skin within seconds. Medical scans showed nothing unusual, and the technician passed all psychological evaluations, yet his personnel file notes that he requested transfer 3 days later, claiming persistent feelings of being watched from inside his own body. His request was denied. He disappeared from his secured housing unit 1 week later, leaving behind a single word written repeatedly across his bedroom walls: synchronize. Patient Zero's physiological anomalies multiplied. Their body temperature fluctuated wildly, sometimes dropping below what should sustain human life before spiking to near-fatal fevers minutes later. More concerning, these temperature shifts began coinciding with atmospheric disturbances in the surrounding desert, cold spots that appeared on satellite thermal imaging, perfectly mirroring Patient Zero's hypothermic episodes. During one particularly severe drop, researchers documented a perfectly circular area of flash-frozen sand 3 miles from the facility. At its center, they discovered a dead coyote, its body contorted impossibly, ribs splayed outward like something had emerged from within. Acoustic anomalies intensified throughout spring. Sound-dampening materials installed in room 12B began degrading at molecular levels, developing microscopic perforations that formed patterns identical to those Patient Zero had drawn months earlier. Audio equipment captured whispers from empty corners of the room, voices speaking in tandem with Patient Zero, yet saying different words, conversations overlapping like radio signals crossing. Linguistic analysis could only identify fragments, repeated references to the breach, the thinning, and most frequently, convergence. The most alarming development came from Dr. Patel herself. After analyzing hundreds of hours of observation footage, she identified subtle patterns in Patient Zero's movements, microscopic gestures, eye movements, and breathing rhythms that, when mapped across time, formed what she described as a form of physical encryption. Her final report, submitted just hours before the June incident, concluded that Patient Zero wasn't simply existing in quarantine, but performing some kind of ongoing operation, a procedure using their own body as both instrument and doorway. On June 17th, at precisely 3:17 a.m., every electronic device within the facility experienced simultaneous failure. Unlike the December incident, no backups activated. When emergency teams arrived 90 minutes later, they found all personnel unconscious. Patient Zero remained in their quarantine room, apparently unchanged, yet something fundamental had shifted. The air inside room 12B now shimmered like heat distortion, though temperature readings remained normal. Most disturbing were the walls themselves. Under certain angles of light, they appeared translucent, revealing glimpses of a space that wasn't the corridor outside, but somewhere else entirely. The facility staff eventually recovered, but with troubling aftereffects. 27 personnel reported identical experiences during their blackout, dreams of walking through familiar landscapes that gradually transformed into somewhere alien, where light bent wrongly around shapes that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. 3 staff members were found to have developed Patient Zero's characteristic subcutaneous movement. They were immediately quarantined, but brain scans showed normal human patterns, unlike the anomalous readings from Patient Zero. When interviewed separately, each gave identical responses, describing themselves as synchronized now and just echoes of what's coming through. Dr. Patel's final recording, made using an analog tape recorder after the facility's systems came back online, contains perhaps the most chilling assessment. Patient Zero isn't Patient Zero at all. They're just the first successful translation, the first message that managed to take human form. The quarantine was never about containing a contagion. It's about controlling a convergence point. God help us, we've been studying the punctuation while missing the entire message. The facility remains operational, the quarantine unbroken. But security cameras occasionally capture glimpses of strange distortions around room 12B, moments when the walls seem to breathe, or when Patient Zero appears in 2 places simultaneously. And in the desert above, researchers have begun mapping a growing pattern of temperature anomalies, forming what appears from satellite imagery to be an enormous version of the molecular structures Patient Zero first drew on the observation glass. The convergence continues, one whisper at a time. In the Appalachian foothills, where cell signals fade and GPS coordinates blur, there exists a hospital that appears on no official map. Some say it materializes only for those desperate enough to need it. Others insist it's always been there, hiding in plain sight, its weathered brick exterior blending into the mountain backdrop like a chameleon against stone. The locals don't speak of it directly. They merely gesture vaguely toward the northern ridge when travelers ask for medical help after dark. Marcus Wheeler first encountered the nameless hospital on a stormy October night in 2017. His windshield wipers fought against the torrential downpour as he navigated unfamiliar mountain roads, already lost for hours after his phone died. The pain in his abdomen had grown from a dull ache to knife-like stabs. When headlights illuminated a hand-painted sign reading simply hospital, he turned without hesitation, his vision blurring at the edges. The building emerged suddenly from the mist, a sprawling 3-story structure with windows glowing amber against the night. Marcus would later describe it as frozen in time, like someone had preserved a 1950s medical facility under glass. He parked haphazardly and stumbled through entrance doors that swung open with unexpected silence. The interior hit him with sensory contradictions. Antiseptic scents mingled with something earthy and ancient. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, yet cast shadows where they shouldn't exist. A nurse materialized at his side, her uniform pristinely white, but styled decades out of date. "We've been expecting you," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. Before Marcus could question her statement, another wave of pain doubled him over. The next hours blurred into fragmented memories, being wheeled down corridors that seemed to expand and contract like breathing lungs, ceiling tiles that displayed constellations he couldn't identify, doctors speaking in hushed tones about unusual progression and temporal anomalies. When Marcus awoke, sunlight streamed through windows that faced impossibly west, though he clearly remembered entering on the building's east side. A different nurse checked his vitals, explaining he'd undergone an emergency appendectomy. "You arrived just in time," she remarked, her eyes never quite meeting his. Another hour and sepsis would have set in. When Marcus asked about insurance paperwork, she smiled cryptically. "We don't concern ourselves with such things. You needed help. We provided it." The strangest element of Marcus's story wasn't the inexplicable hospital itself, but what happened when he was discharged. The doctor, a tall man with antiquated spectacles and impeccable posture, handed him a small wooden box instead of prescription medication. "Take 1 pinch of this powder mixed with water each morning for 7 days, he instructed. "After that, you'll never need to find us again." Following the doctor's directions to return to the main road, Marcus drove for what felt like minutes before reaching a highway he recognized. His navigation app suddenly regained signal, placing him over 80 miles from where he thought he'd been. When he later tried to locate the hospital on maps or through local inquiries, he found nothing. The powder, which he described as tasting of earth and electricity, healed his surgical wound without leaving even the faintest scar. Marcus Wheeler's experience might be dismissed as hallucination brought on by pain and medication, if it weren't for the hundreds of similar accounts collected over decades. People with life-threatening conditions, lost in the same general region, finding a hospital that defies modern record-keeping. Each patient reports the same impossible architecture, staff who seem to anticipate their arrival, and treatments that sometimes incorporate methods long abandoned by conventional medicine. Dr. Eliza Thornton, a medical anthropologist who has spent 15 years studying these accounts, believes there's a pattern to who finds the hospital and who doesn't. Those who encounter it are invariably at critical medical crossroads, not just physically but temporally, she explains. Their timing of care matters down to the minute, and each person describes the building slightly differently, as though it shapes itself to match medical facilities from their own formative memories. The most compelling evidence for the hospital's existence comes from what patients bring back, unusual remedies in distinctive containers that laboratory analysis can't fully deconstruct. Substances containing compounds unknown to modern pharmacology, yet demonstrably effective. But what keeps Dr. Thornton awake at night isn't the mysterious cures, but the pattern she's begun to notice in patient outcomes. Those treated at the unmapped hospital don't just recover, Their lifespans extend significantly beyond statistical predictions, as though something fundamental about their relationship with time has been altered. Local historian Gerald Kittredge has uncovered fragments suggesting the hospital's origins might date back to Civil War field medicine. Historical records mention a temporary medical station that treated soldiers from both sides, he notes. Witnesses describe doctors using unconventional methods and achieving miraculous results. Most intriguing is an account of a Union captain who claimed the field hospital moved with the mountains and could never be found in the same place twice. What exists in those Appalachian foothills, whether physical building, collective hallucination, or something between dimensions, has cultivated its own mythology. Desperate families sometimes drive the winding mountain roads with critically ill loved ones, hoping to get lost in exactly the right way. Park rangers report finding abandoned vehicles whose owners later turn up miles away, unable to explain how they traveled such distances on foot, but curative ailments that modern hospitals had deemed terminal. Perhaps most disturbing are the stories of medical professionals who claim to have worked shifts at the unmapped hospital without applying for positions there. A cardiac surgeon from Baltimore described being drawn off course during a hiking trip, finding herself performing emergency surgery with instruments she'd never seen before, alongside colleagues whose faces became impossible to recall afterward. She reported the experience as dreamlike, yet more real than reality, as though I was practicing medicine the way it was meant to be practiced, unbound by bureaucracy or technological limitations. The hospital that isn't on any map defies rational explanation, yet the evidence of its influence persists in the bodies of those it has healed. Scars that fade too quickly, diseases that disappear without trace, patients who should have died but instead thrive for decades beyond their prognosis. It represents medicine's most fundamental paradox. We understand more about the human body than ever before, yet healing itself remains mysteriously beyond our full comprehension. Marcus Wheeler, 5 years after his unexplained appendectomy, still keeps the wooden box that once contained his medicine, though it's been empty for years. Sometimes he swears it smells faintly of antiseptic and mountain air when opened under a full moon. He's never returned to the Appalachians, afraid of what it might mean if he tried to find the hospital again. Some things help you once, he says, fingers tracing the box's worn edges, but seeking them out a second time tempts a kind of fate I don't understand. As scientific investigations push harder against the boundaries of the hospital mystery, strange patterns emerge in the data. Researchers who focus too intently on locating the facility report equipment malfunctions, lost records, and even temporary memory gaps. Geographic anomalies appear in satellite imaging of the region, shadows that don't match the terrain, distortions that technical experts can't explain. The hospital seems to actively resist documentation, as though secrecy is fundamental to its purpose. Dr. Thornton's latest research focuses on an unsettling question. What happens to those who find the hospital but refuse treatment? Her team has identified 7 cases where individuals claim to have reached the mysterious facility but left without accepting care. Each describes being followed afterward by medical personnel who appeared in crowds at their workplaces or even in their homes, always watching but never approaching. These 7 individuals share another commonality. None has lived longer than 1 year after their encounter. The hospital that exists outside conventional geography represents our deepest hopes and fears about medicine. It offers healing that seems miraculous, yet demands complete surrender to unknown methods. It appears when needed most, yet cannot be summoned at will. Like health itself, the facility exists in the liminal space between what we can control and what remains eternally beyond our reach. For those who believe in its existence, the unmapped hospital serves as both warning and comfort, a reminder that even in our mapped, measured, and monitored world, some mysteries remain deliberately unsolved. The building's persistent elusiveness suggests that perhaps some knowledge isn't meant to be systematized, some healing not meant to be replicated. And for the desperately ill travelers, who still find themselves on misty mountain roads after dark, following signs that shouldn't exist. This remains both their greatest fear and their final hope. Forgotten wing of St. Bartholomew's Hospital stood as a relic of medical history, its dilapidated corridors haunted by the ghosts of Victorian innovation. Operating Theater 6, buried in the subterranean maze beneath the modern facility, remained untouched for over a century. The tiled room with its steep wooden benches had witnessed thousands of procedures during an era when anesthesia was rudimentary and mercy was measured in the surgeon's speed. But what made Theater 6 unique wasn't just its preserved antiquity. It was the persistent rumors that something unnatural occurred during its final recorded procedure in 1889, something that prompted hospital administrators to seal the room and strike all mention of a doctor. Alexander Blackwood from official records. January's record-breaking rainfall had compromised the old hospital foundation, sending water cascading through forgotten passageways and forcing maintenance crews into areas long abandoned. When electrician Sam Whitley discovered the sealed oak door behind a collapsed section of modern drywall, his flashlight beam illuminated a perfectly preserved surgical amphitheater that had remained untouched for generations. The brass fixtures gleamed through a layer of dust, as though time had merely taken a brief intermission rather than abandoned the space entirely. Sam's discovery might have remained a historical curiosity if not for what happened when the restoration team began documenting the space. Restoration specialist Dr. Eliza Morgan was recording detailed measurements when her digital equipment began malfunctioning in ways that defied explanation. Cameras captured shadowy figures that weren't visible to the naked eye, while audio recordings picked up what sounded like distant, agonized screaming beneath the regular ambient noise. These anomalies might have been dismissed as technical glitches if Eliza hadn't experienced the inexplicable cold spots or the overwhelming sense that unseen eyes followed her every movement. The room seemed to breathe with a rhythm of its own, expanding and contracting like a diseased lung struggling for air. The hospital board wanted the theater restored as a historical exhibit, but the workers assigned to the project reported increasing disturbances. Tools vanished only to reappear in impossible locations. A painter suffered a peculiar laceration across his abdomen that mimicked a surgical incision. Most disturbing were the nightmares. Every person who spent more than an hour in Theater 6 began experiencing the same dream of being strapped to the central table while a faceless surgeon approached with instruments that gleamed like teeth in moonlight. When researcher Martin Chin delved into hospital archives to uncover the theater's history, he found evidence of systematic removal, pages torn from logbooks, gaps in patient records, and an entire volume of surgical notes conspicuously missing. The only reference to the theater's final operation came from a personal diary belonging to a nurse named Catherine Wells, which described Dr. Blackwood's increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading to the theater's closure. According to her entries, the brilliant surgeon had become obsessed with what he called pain's transcendent properties after returning from an expedition to certain remote Himalayan monasteries. The diary's final entry, dated November 17, 1889, contained a hurried scrawl, "God forgive us for what we've done. The patient wasn't dead when we began." The screaming, I still hear it even now. But worse was the silence that followed, and what emerged when we cut too deep. Blackwood says we've opened a door. Something has come through, and I fear it will never leave this place. The next day, Theater 6 was permanently sealed by hospital order, and all staff present during the final procedure were transferred to distant facilities or left the medical profession entirely. As restoration continued despite growing concerns, workers began experiencing physical symptoms that defied medical explanation. Their skin turned waxy and pale, their eyes developed a jaundiced cast, and several reported feeling phantom incisions across their bodies when they slept. More troubling were the voices they claimed to hear emanating from the theater's drain, whispers that promised knowledge in exchange for what they cryptically referred to as vessels. These symptoms persisted even after they left the hospital grounds, as though they had carried some contagion of Theater 6 home with them. The question remained, what exactly happened during that final procedure? And why does the room seem to retain the memory of it like a wound that refuses to heal? The answer may lie with the mysterious patient, identified in Catherine's diary only as Subject Omega, and what Dr. Blackwood actually uncovered during his travels. What truth lurks beneath the sterile surface of medical progress, waiting to be reawakened by those who disturb its resting place? Martinchin couldn't explain why he felt compelled to return to Theater 6 after hours. The restoration team had left for the day, abandoning their tools like offerings to the room's oppressive silence. The surgical lamps, newly reconnected to the hospital's electrical system, cast pools of harsh light across the ancient operating table. Martin ran his fingers along the table's edge, feeling an odd warmth pulsing through the metal despite the room's pervasive chill. The drain in the center of the sloped floor emitted a faint, rhythmic gurgling, like something breathing through fluid-filled lungs. The hospital's archival photographs showed the theater packed with medical students observing procedures, their faces a blend of scientific curiosity and morbid fascination. These witnesses to suffering formed a human gallery that absorbed the screams, the blood, the desperate prayers of patients operated on while still conscious. The walls themselves seemed saturated with these memories, like sponges soaked in decades of terror and hope. Martin couldn't shake the sensation that those same witnesses were somehow still present, invisible but attentive, waiting for the next performance to begin. His research had yielded unexpected connections. Dr. Blackwood's expedition had been funded not by medical institutions, but by an obscure philosophical society called the Transcendent Order, which believed that certain states of consciousness could pierce the veil between worlds. Their manuscripts described pain as the supreme conductor, through which communication with entities beyond normal perception became possible. More disturbing was Blackwood's final paper, rejected by all medical journals, but preserved in the Society's archives, which proposed that surgical theaters were inadvertently designed as perfect chambers for summoning. Their circular construction, the focused attention of multiple observers, and the extreme states of consciousness experienced by patients created what he called thin points in reality. Martin discovered a hidden compartment beneath the theater's central drain, containing a lead box sealed with strange symbols. Inside lay Dr. Blackwood's surgical journal, its pages stained with substances that had turned black with age. The detailed sketches showed modifications to standard surgical tools, ritual symbols etched into scalpel handles, bizarre geometrical arrangements for the placement of retractors, and meticulous diagrams for incisions that corresponded to no known medical procedure. Blackwood described his final patient not as someone to be saved, but as a willing gateway whose suffering would unlock the wisdom beyond pain. The journal's final pages contained increasingly frantic handwriting. Blackwood wrote of success, something had responded to his surgical ritual. "It speaks through the open body," he wrote. "It offers knowledge beyond human constraint, requiring only vessels to house its consciousness." The last entry broke into disjointed phrases. "Cannot contain. Too many witnesses, spreading through the theater. The observers becoming the observed. We are all becoming patients now." Martin's blood ran cold as he realized what Blackwood had done. The surgeon hadn't simply performed an unethical procedure. He had conducted a ritual using the architectural properties of Theater 6 itself, with devastating consequences. As Martin reached this realization, the lights in the theater flickered. The temperature plummeted until his breath formed crystals in the air. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement on the empty wooden benches, faint outlines of figures leaning forward with intense interest. The surgical tools on the side table trembled, then aligned themselves in a precise pattern he recognized from Blackwood's diagrams. Most terrifying of all, the center of the operating table began to depress, as though an invisible body were being laid upon it, a body that created a perfect outline in the accumulated dust. Eliza Morgan found Martin the next morning, lying unconscious on the theater floor. When he eventually awoke in the hospital's modern wing, He could remember nothing of the night before. The doctors found no physical explanation for his condition, though they noted unusual brain activity patterns identical to those observed in the other restoration workers. More alarming was the perfectly formed surgical scar across Martin's abdomen, a precise incision that showed signs of professional suturing despite no record of any procedure being performed. The discovery prompted hospital administration to suspend the restoration project, but the decision came too late. Whatever presence occupied Theater 6 had found new vessels. The affected workers began demonstrating remarkable medical knowledge they couldn't possibly possess. They spoke of revolutionary surgical techniques with the confidence of seasoned professionals. Some began performing unauthorized examinations on friends and family members. Most disturbing was their collective insistence that pain was not something to be eliminated from medical procedures, but rather the essential conduit through which true healing manifests. Security footage from the hospital revealed these individuals returning to Theater 6 night after night, taking their places on the observation benches, while one would lie upon the central table. The cameras never captured what, or who, stood in the surgeon's position, handling instruments that moved with terrible purpose through the air. With each passing night, more hospital staff found themselves drawn to these macabre performances, unable to resist the compulsion to witness what transpired in the ancient operating theater. The infection of influence spread like a contagion through the hospital hierarchy. Dr. Eliza Morgan remained the sole, unaffected member of the original team. Her immunity appeared connected to an antique amulet she'd inherited from her grandmother, who had worked as a nurse at St. Bartholomew's in the early 1900s. Inscribed with the same symbols found on Blackwood's lead box, it seemed to shield her from the theater's influence. Through painstaking research, she discovered that her grandmother had been part of a group that originally sealed Theater 6, using protective rituals passed down from those who had survived the aftermath of Blackwood's final procedure. As patients throughout the hospital began reporting nightmares of being observed by silent figures, while unseen hands explored their bodies, Eliza realized that the opening of Theater 6 had reactivated something dormant but never truly contained. The entity's influence extended beyond the physical boundaries of the room now, seeping through the hospital's infrastructure like a malevolent bloodstream. What Blackwood had invited across the threshold continued its work through new hands, new instruments, new vessels. The operating theater had resumed its performances, with the entire hospital becoming its stage. Shadows grew longer across the abandoned hospital floor as Tim edged his flashlight beam around the corner. Most urban explorers avoided St. Mary's Children's Hospital, not because of security, but because of the stories. Tim had documented dozens of abandoned buildings for his YouTube channel, but something about this place made his skin crawl even before entering. Now, 3 floors deep into the derelict structure, he felt it. That peculiar silence that seemed to listen back. "This section should be the children's wing," he whispered to his camera, the words hanging in the stale air. Abandoned since 1987, when the hospital relocated across town. The beam caught a faded mural, cartoon animals, with chip paint smiles guiding invisible patients down the hallway. But it wasn't the artwork that made Tim freeze. It was what waited at the end of the corridor. A perfectly intact playroom, toys still arranged as if children had just stepped away for a moment. In urban exploration circles, the abandoned St. Mary's had become somewhat legendary. Most places Tim explored showed clear signs of decay and vandalism, nature reclaiming spaces or humans destroying them. But according to the rumors, the 3rd-floor children's wing remained untouched, preserved like a museum exhibit no one curated. No graffiti marred the walls. No evidence of squatters or teen parties. Just waiting rooms with magazines from the 1980s and play areas with toys arranged in careful formations. Tim's footsteps echoed as he approached the playroom. Dust motes danced in his flashlight beam, yet the floor showed curious tracks, small, like a child's footprint, pressed into decades of dust. "That's the odd," he murmured, kneeling to examine them. The impressions looked fresh, which made no sense in a building sealed for 35 years. He panned his camera across the room, capturing the vintage Fisher-Price toys, a plastic kitchen set, and stuffed animals positioned in a semicircle, as if attending some invisible tea party. Something clattered behind him. Tim spun around, hard hammering against his ribs. A small red ball rolled lazily across the linoleum, coming to rest against his boot. It had come from an open supply closet across the hall, a closet Tim was certain had been closed moments before. His mouth went dry. Urban exploration had its dangers: collapsing floors, asbestos, occasional security, but nothing had prepared him for toys that moved on their own. "Hello," his voice cracked, suddenly childlike in its uncertainty. "Is someone there?" Only the building's skeletal frame answered, creaking in the night wind. Tim picked up the ball, surprised by its weight, solid and real, not some figment of his imagination. The rubber felt warm to the touch, as though recently handled. The stories other explorers told now seemed less like campfire tales and more like warnings. They spoke of sounds, children's laughter echoing down empty corridors, tiny footsteps padding behind visitors, toys rearranged between camera shots. Most disturbing were the accounts of those who stayed overnight, claiming they awoke to find small indentations on the bed beside them, as if someone very small had been watching them sleep. Tim placed the ball on a nearby shelf, trying to rationalize. Old buildings settled. Drafts moved light objects. His own footsteps could have disturbed something that then rolled toward him. Yet none of these explanations addressed the warmth of the toy, or the footprints too small to be his own. As he turned to leave, his flashlight swept across the far wall, revealing a mural he hadn't noticed before. Children holding hands in a circle, their faces unnervingly detailed compared to the cartoonish hallway art. One child stared directly outward, eyes seemingly following Tim as he moved. And tucked in that painted child's arm was a small red ball, identical to the one he'd just placed on the shelf. Tim's flashlight flickered once, twice, then plunged the room into darkness. In the momentary blackness, he heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of children giggling, and the patter of small feet approaching from all sides. When the light sputtered back to life, Tim stood alone in the center of the room. Alone except for the toys, which now formed a perfect circle around him. And the red ball, no longer on the shelf, clutched tightly in his trembling hand. The YouTube comments poured in immediately after Tim posted the first part of his Saint. Mary's hospital exploration. Most viewers assumed it was staged, another content creator using clever editing to manufacture scares. The skeptics had reasonable arguments. The moved toys could be explained by cuts in footage, the footprints pre-made before filming, the rolling ball a simple camera trick. Tim read the comments with a hollow feeling in his stomach. He hadn't uploaded the rest of the footage yet, couldn't bring himself to watch it again. What the viewers hadn't seen was what happened after his flashlight came back on. The circle of toys wasn't the end of the encounter, but the beginning. Tim's camera had captured something he only discovered during editing. Tiny fingerprints appearing on the lens, smudging from the inside. And in the background audio, beneath his panicked breathing, children's voices whispered words he couldn't quite make out, except for one phrase repeated clearly: "Stay and play with us." Local historians contacted Tim after the video gained traction. They shared hospital records from St. Mary's final years, specifically about the third floor. That wing had housed terminal pediatric patients, children with little hope for recovery, who spent their final months in those rooms. The play therapy area had been their one source of joy, a space where illness momentarily receded and they could simply be kids again. According to a former nurse Tim interviewed, the children formed deep bonds, promising each other they would always meet in the playroom, even after they were gone. The hospital staff had noticed peculiarities even before the facility closed. Toys would migrate between rooms overnight. Music boxes played without being wound. The night shift reported hearing laughter from the empty playroom. Most disturbing were the accounts from dying children who spoke of friends visiting them, describing in perfect detail patients who had passed away weeks or months earlier. The staff had attributed these stories to medication, fever dreams, or the imagination of children processing their own mortality. Tim couldn't stop thinking about what he'd felt in that room. Not just fear, but a profound sense of loneliness and longing that didn't feel like his own emotions. The toys hadn't been arranged threateningly. They had formed a circle with a space just his size, as if inviting him to join them. The ball hadn't been thrown at him, but rolled gently to his feet, a child's universal invitation to play. Against all better judgment, Tim decided to return. This time he brought specialized equipment, high-definition night vision cameras, EVP recorders, thermal imaging, and motion sensors. He also brought something the online paranormal community thought odd: toys. New board games, stuffed animals, and art supplies filled his backpack alongside the ghost hunting gear. If children had been trapped there for decades with the same toys, perhaps new ones would be appreciated. As darkness fell on his second visit, Tim set up a base in the hospital lobby, running cables to cameras throughout the children's wing. He placed the new toys in the playroom with a simple note: "These are for you. I just want to understand who you are." Then he retreated to monitor the feeds, watching the empty playroom on his laptop screen. For hours, nothing happened. The skeptical part of his mind began to wonder if he had imagined everything during his first visit. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the motion sensors triggered. On screen, the playroom door slowly closed by itself. The thermal camera showed cold spots forming, small, child-sized heat signatures that appeared and disappeared. The new toys began to move, first the stuffed bear, then the colored pencils. On the audio feed, Tim heard what sounded like whispered thank yous and the unmistakable sound of children's laughter, not menacing, but genuinely joyful. The shadows grew longer as twilight descended on the small town of Millfield, the amber streetlights flickering to life one by one. Most businesses had closed for the day, their windows dark, their doors locked, all except for Harmon's Pharmacy. The ancient neon sign buzzed inconsistently, casting eerie blue light across the cracked sidewalk below. From the outside, nothing seemed particularly unusual about the old drugstore, with its weathered brick facade and dusty display window advertising sales from 3 seasons ago. But what happened inside those walls after closing hours would haunt the town for generations. Emma Larson pulled her coat tighter against the autumn chill as she hurried down Main Street. Her daughter's fever had spiked suddenly, and she needed children's medicine. Relief washed over her when she spotted the pharmacy's lights still glowing despite the late hour. The bells above the door jingled as Emma entered, but the counter stood empty. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing through the silent aisles. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating shelves of medications, bandages, and toiletries. A peculiar stillness hung in the air, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an ancient wall clock reading 9:48 p.m. She wandered deeper into the store, past greeting cards and vitamins, until she reached the pharmacy counter at the back. Still no sign of Mr. Harmon or any employees. The computer behind the counter glowed with an open prescription record, a half-filled pill bottle beside it. A cup of coffee steamed nearby, as though someone had just stepped away moments ago. Emma felt unease crawl up her spine, cold as ice water. Something wasn't right. The pharmacy never went unattended, not even for a minute, Mr. Harmon had run this place with clockwork precision for 40 years. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the service bell. The sharp ding pierced the silence, but summoned no one. That's when she noticed them, wet footprints leading from behind the counter toward the stockroom door. They glistened under the fluorescent light, too fresh to have been there long. The strange thing was their pattern. They came from the stockroom, circled the pharmacy counter once, then returned to the stockroom. Single file, as if someone had walked in a deliberate circle before retreating. But the liquid wasn't water. It was too dark, too viscous, leaving smeared edges like watercolors bleeding into paper. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she leaned closer. The footprints had a coppery smell that turned her stomach. Blood? No, impossible. Yet the metallic scent hung in the air, undeniable as a scream. Her maternal instincts battled with mounting terror. Her daughter needed medicine, but every cell in her body screamed to leave. The stockroom door stood slightly ajar, darkness spilling out like ink from its edges. And then, unmistakably, came a soft shuffling sound from beyond that threshold. Time seemed to crystallize around Emma as her options narrowed to fight or flight. The back exit sign glowed red near the pharmacy counter. She could be out in seconds. But curiosity, that ancient human flaw, rooted her feet to the linoleum. What if Mr. Harmon had fallen? What if someone needed help? The footprints continued their perfect circle, ending at that slightly open door like an invitation. Or a warning. The shuffling sound came again, followed by what might have been breathing, deep, labored, unnatural. Emma took one hesitant step toward the stockroom, then another. The blood-like substance now stained the toes of her sensible work shoes. The pharmacy's lights flickered once, twice, plunging everything into momentary darkness before returning. In that split second of blackness, Emma could have sworn she saw something move in the gap of the stockroom door, something tall and hunched, watching her through the sliver of open space with patience as vast as the midnight sky. And as the light stabilized, a single, fresh footprint appeared directly in front of the door, facing outward. Someone, or something, had taken one step toward her while the lights were out. He wasn't supposed to be working late that night. Russell Harmon, 67 years old with arthritic hands and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, had planned to close early. His granddaughter's birthday celebration awaited him, complete with homemade cake and wrapped presents sitting in his car. But the delivery had come late, unusual medications for Mrs. Winchester's chronic condition, and he couldn't leave them unprocessed until morning. So he stayed, telling his assistant Janet to go ahead without him. "I'll just be 20 minutes behind you," he had assured her with a grandfatherly smile. That was the last time anyone would see Russell Harmon alive. Police records would later show that the security camera inside Harmon's pharmacy captured 43 minutes of ordinary footage that evening, Russell counting pills, typing on the computer, occasionally checking his watch. Then, at precisely 9:32 p.m., the footage showed him looking up sharply, as if someone had called his name. His expression changed from concentration to confusion, then to recognition, and finally, inexplicably, to terror. He backed away from the counter, pointing at something off camera, his mouth forming words the silent footage couldn't capture. The feed cut to static for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. When it resumed, the pharmacy was empty except for those glistening footprints making their perfect circle. Detective Marla Suarez stood in that same spot 2 days later, the pharmacy now wrapped in crime scene tape, its windows covered with paper to block curious onlookers. Forensics had analyzed the footprints and confirmed what everyone feared: human blood, type AB negative, belonging to Russell Harmon. But the old pharmacist's body remained missing, the only evidence of violence being the blood trail that led nowhere. The stockroom had been meticulously examined. No hidden doors, no secret passages, nowhere a body could be concealed. Yet something had happened in those 3 minutes of static, something that left bloody footprints in a perfect circle and made a beloved community member vanish into thin air. "It's like he was part of some ritual," Officer Davis muttered, snapping photos of the blood pattern. "The circle is too perfect to be random." Marla nodded absently, her focus drawn to a small detail others had overlooked. The security camera footage showed Harmon wearing his signature brown loafers that night. but the bloody footprints belonged to someone wearing work boots with the distinctive tread pattern, size 13, much larger than Harmon's size 9 feet. Whoever left those prints wasn't Harmon, which meant someone else had been in the pharmacy that night, someone who wasn't captured by the cameras, someone who had apparently circled the pharmacy counter in the pharmacist's own blood. The case file grew thicker as days passed. Emma Larson's statement, the inconclusive forensics report, the missing medication inventory, narcotics, primarily, but also stranger items, syringes, chemical compounds, and oddly, every bottle of rubbing alcohol in the store. The town of Millfield buzzed with theories ranging from drug-related robbery gone wrong to more outlandish supernatural explanations. Children began avoiding the pharmacy, claiming they could see bloody footprints appearing on the sidewalk outside at dusk. Adults nervously changed their prescriptions to the chain pharmacy in the neighboring town. What nobody discussed publicly was the fact that Harmon's wasn't the first disappearance connected to the old pharmacy. In 1978, shortly after Edward Harmon, Russell's father, opened the business, his young assistant vanished after working late. The case went cold when police found no evidence of foul play. Then in 1993, a drug sales representative disappeared after her car was found parked outside Harmon's with her sample case still locked in the trunk. Again, no leads, no closure. The pharmacy seemed to consume people whole, once every 15 years, like clockwork. As the investigation stalled, Detective Suarez found herself drawn to the town archives, poring over musty records by flashlight after hours. The pharmacy building itself had a history predating the Harmon family business. Built in 1932, it had originally housed a doctor's office during the height of the Great Depression. Dr. Malcolm Price had developed a reputation for miracle cures, treating patients other doctors had abandoned as hopeless. His practice thrived until 1947, when 7 patients died under mysterious circumstances within a single week. Price disappeared before authorities could question him. His office left exactly as it had been on his last day. Prescription pads still open, medical bags still packed. The case was never solved. The building remained vacant for decades, carrying whispers of curses and contamination, until Edward Harmon purchased it in 1978, either ignorant of or indifferent to its troubled history. Now, examining blueprints from the original construction, Marla's finger traced over a detail that sent ice through her veins. The building plans showed a basement level that didn't appear in any modern records. A basement that, according to current building specifications, simply didn't exist. Heart of St. Mary's Hospital, a place where the boundaries between life and death blur like watercolors on wet paper. Something inexplicable happened on November 12, 2003. The night shift at the morgue began like any other, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the faint scent of disinfectant cutting through the cold air. But at precisely 3:17 a.m., morgue drawer number 9 slid open without human intervention, setting in motion a mystery that would haunt medical professionals for years to come. Dr. Richard Mercer had worked the graveyard shift at St. Mary's Morgue for 11 years. A man of science with silver-streaked hair and hands steady enough to thread a needle in darkness, he prided himself on rational thought. That night, he was updating files when the metallic scrape of drawer 9 echoed through the room. The sound was unmistakable, the same reluctant groan the stainless steel made when pulled by living hands. But Dr. Mercer was alone, his only company the 16 occupied drawers holding those who had recently departed. "I froze," he later told investigators, his voice still carrying the tremor of that night. 17 feet separated me from that wall of drawers, and yet I couldn't move a single inch. When he finally summoned the courage to approach, drawer 9 stood open by 6 inches, not wide enough for anything to escape, but certainly wider than the closed position it had occupied minutes earlier. Inside lay the body of Catherine Whitley, a 73-year-old woman who had passed from heart failure earlier that evening. The security footage captured the event with clinical precision. At 3:17 a.m., The handle on drawer 9 moved downward, as if depressed by invisible fingers. The drawer then glided outward smoothly, stopping at precisely 6 inches. No electromagnetic anomalies were recorded. No tremors registered on the hospital's sensitive geological equipment. The building's foundation remained steady as bedrock. What makes this case particularly chilling is that drawer 9 required 27 pounds of horizontal pressure to open, not something that could happen from simple gravity or building settlement. Hospital administration initially suspected a prank by staff, or perhaps a mechanical failure. But thorough examination by 3 separate engineering firms confirmed the locking mechanism worked flawlessly before and after the incident. The drawer moved with intention, defying both gravity and logic. What's more, Catherine Whitley's body showed no signs of disturbance. She remained in exactly the same position as when Dr. Kennis had placed her there at 9:42 p.m. As word spread through the hospital staff, details emerged about Catherine Whitley that cast a strange shadow over the events. A retired physics professor, she had spent her final years researching theoretical concepts about consciousness persisting after clinical death. Her notebooks, later examined by her daughter Julia, contained complex equations and one haunting question written repeatedly: what if awareness continues after the final heartbeat? The drawer opening itself might have remained a curious but isolated incident, filed away as unexplained, if not for what happened exactly 1 week later. At 3:17 a.m., drawer 9 again opened to precisely the same 6-inch position. But by then, Catherine Whitley's body had been released to her family. The drawer contained a different patient, Martin Greaves, age 67, with no connection to Catherine whatsoever. 5 hospital employees witnessed this second opening, including the newly installed night security guard stationed specifically to observe the morgue. None could explain it. Equipment tests revealed no malfunctions, no power surges, no structural shifts. The drawer simply decided to open, as if prompted by an unseen hand or an unheard command. Hospital chaplain Father Thomas Reeves suggested a blessing for the morgue, which administration permitted more to calm staff than from institutional belief in supernatural causes. What makes drawer 9's behavior truly remarkable is not just its mystery, but its precision. In both documented cases, it opened exactly 6 inches, not 5, not 7, and always at the same minute of the same hour. Like a clock obeying laws beyond human understanding, drawer 9 seemed to operate on a timeline invisible to everyone except, perhaps, those already beyond the veil of mortality. And in the quiet hours of St. Mary's Morgue, as the living kept watch over the dead, many began to wonder who exactly was in control. The phenomenon continued with mechanical regularity for 6 consecutive weeks. Every Tuesday at 3:17 a.m., drawer number 9 would slide open 6 inches and remain that way for precisely 8 minutes before closing with the same deliberate pace. Security footage captured each episode from multiple angles, yet revealed nothing to explain the movement. No drafts, no vibrations, no external forces could account for what was happening. The drawer operated against its own mechanical resistance as if guided by an unseen intelligence. Hospital administration grew increasingly desperate to find an explanation. They brought in paranormal investigators alongside mechanical engineers, structural analysts, and even magicians skilled in detecting sleight of hand. None could replicate or explain the drawer's behavior. They installed new locks, reinforced the mechanisms, and even completely replaced drawer 9. Yet the replacement drawer began exhibiting the exact same behavior on its very first Tuesday. Dr. Lisa Chambers, the hospital's chief medical examiner, compiled detailed records of every body that had occupied drawer 9 since the occurrences began. Her analysis revealed something statisticians would call impossible. An unusually high percentage of the deceased had been researchers, theorists, or deeply spiritual people who had questioned the nature of consciousness and mortality during their lives. Catherine Whitley was just the beginning of a pattern too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. These individuals spent their lives questioning the boundary between existence and non-existence, Dr. Chambers noted in her report. Perhaps in death, they found an answer and a way to reach back. Her colleagues dismissed this theory as unscientific speculation, but no one could offer a more convincing explanation. The hospital staff began to change their relationship with Drawer 9. Some refused to place bodies there, while others specifically requested certain patients be assigned to it. Nurse Rebecca Winters started leaving notebooks beside the drawer, their pages blank except for simple questions written at the top. By morning, those pages would remain empty, and yet some staff swore they saw indentations, as though pressed by a pencil that left no mark. When media attention threatened to turn the hospital into a paranormal tourist destination, administration implemented a mandatory silence policy regarding Drawer 9. Security was tightened, and only essential personnel were permitted in the morgue. The weekly openings continued, but with fewer witnesses to spread the story. Meanwhile, researchers from major universities quietly approached the hospital, offering substantial grants to study the phenomenon. Most were turned away. Julia Whitley, Catherine's daughter, gained special permission to spend a night in the morgue exactly 3 months after her mother's death. A theoretical physicist herself, Julia brought sensitive equipment to measure quantum fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, and temperature variations. What she recorded defied conventional physics, localized time dilation around the drawer, with seconds passing fractionally slower within a 3-foot radius. Something is happening in that space that challenges our basic understanding of reality, Julia later wrote in a private journal. I believe my mother found what she was looking for, proof that consciousness doesn't end with clinical death. Rather than passing entirely beyond our reality, perhaps it exists simultaneously across multiple states, occasionally finding ways to manifest in the physical world. The local Catholic diocese eventually sent Father Miguel Santos, an experienced exorcist, to evaluate the situation. After spending 3 nights observing the drawer, he declined to perform any rituals. This is not malevolent, he reported to his superiors. Whatever causes this movement is simply trying to communicate. The drawer opens, but never fully, like a door held ajar between 2 rooms, allowing just enough space for a message to pass through. As the phenomenon reached its 6th month, it suddenly evolved. Drawer 9 began opening at irregular intervals, no longer bound to Tuesday mornings. Staff would enter the morgue to find it already open, with no record of when the movement occurred. Security cameras experienced unexplained malfunctions during these new incidents. The most unsettling development came when morgue technician James Foster arrived one morning to find all drawers closed, but the contents of 9, the body of a renowned quantum physicist, had somehow been rotated 180 degrees within the completely closed drawer. Hospital administrators faced an impossible situation. They couldn't relocate their morgue facilities without enormous expense, yet they couldn't explain or control what was happening. The drawer had become a silent revolt against our understanding of death, a crack in the foundation of certainty upon which modern medicine is built. For if consciousness can manipulate matter after clinical death, what else might be possible in that shadowy territory between living and not? Scientists continue to debate whether Drawer 9 represents a genuine paranormal phenomenon, an undiscovered property of physics, or an elaborate hoax waiting to be exposed. But for those who have witnessed it firsthand, who have stood in the cold, sterile environment of St. Mary's Morgue and watched solid metal move against all physical laws, the question isn't whether something extraordinary is happening, but what it means for our understanding of life, death, and what might exist in between those states. Perhaps most chilling of all is what the night janitor reported overhearing Dr. Mercer whisper while staring at Drawer 9 during one of its inexplicable openings. We've been looking at this all wrong. It's not trying to get out. It's inviting us in. In the stillness of Memorial Hospital's abandoned West Wing, the footsteps still echo. Nurses in crisp white uniforms appear from nowhere, tending to patients who aren't there, their phantom touches leaving goosebumps on visitors who stray too far from the populated halls. Ask any long-term staff member about the fifth floor night shift, and their eyes will drift to the ceiling, voices dropping to whispers. They never left, you know. Some duties transcend death. Memorial Hospital stands tall against the Michigan skyline, its limestone facade weathered by a century of harsh winters. The oldest section, constructed in 1919 as soldiers returned broken from European battlefields, has become a labyrinth of disused corridors and rooms frozen in time. Modern medical equipment and renovations stopped at the heavy fire doors, separating the west wing from the rest. Beyond those doors, the hospital preserves its ghosts like insects in amber. Head nurse Dorothy Klein first documented the phenomena in her private journal in 1943. During the height of wartime nursing shortages, she wrote of impossible assistance appearing during crisis moments. I was alone with 16 critical patients when the hemorrhage began. I called for help knowing no one could hear. Then Margaret appeared beside me, Margaret who had died of tuberculosis 3 months prior. Her hands moved with practiced precision, saving the soldier's life before she walked through the closed door. The accounts multiplied after the polio epidemic of 1952. Nurse Williams would later testify to hospital administrators that she witnessed 3 deceased colleagues moving between iron lungs during a power outage, manually pumping air into struggling patients until electricity returned. Their uniforms, she noted, belonged to an earlier era, high collars and long skirts that had been phased out decades earlier. The hospital board dismissed her report as stress-induced hallucination. What stands out in these accounts isn't terror or malevolence, but rather an unwavering dedication. Unlike the typical hospital hauntings of revenge or tragedy, memorial spirits seem bound by professional oath rather than unfinished business. They appear most often during crisis, when staffing falls short, when patients face their darkest moments, when death looms near. Dr. Sandra Reinhardt, current chief of medicine, keeps a peculiar habit. Before major surgeries, she walks the abandoned corridor to a specific room, 512, where the tuberculosis ward once housed the dying. There, she whispers names and case details, as if briefing an invisible team. When questioned, she smiles tightly. Call it superstition if you want, but I've never lost a patient after consulting the night nurses. The hospital administration has attempted multiple renovations of the West Wing over decades. Each effort has been mysteriously thwarted: equipment malfunctions, workers quitting after unexplained experiences, permits mysteriously denied. During a 1978 demolition attempt, 3 construction workers were found unconscious in the 5th floor hallway, each suffering identical symptoms: lowered body temperature, elevated white blood cell counts, and temporary amnesia. Upon waking, each described women in white, who stopped them from breaking through certain walls. Local paranormal investigators have tried and failed to document the phenomena with equipment. Cameras malfunction, audio recordings capture only static, with occasional rhythmic beeping reminiscent of medical monitors. The few photographers who've succeeded captured only blurred white figures bending over empty beds, their faces obscured but postures suggesting intense concentration. Like sentinels guarding sacred ground, the nurses of memorials shield their domain from modern intrusions. Perhaps most unsettling are the patient testimonies. Those who awaken from near-death experiences frequently describe being tended by nurses who felt different, their hands cooler, their voices distant yet soothing, their movements silent across squeaky hospital floors. Children, especially, report the helpers who come when pain is worst, singing lullabies from another time and smoothing back hair with gentle fingers that leave no impression on the pillow. One 80-year-old leukemia patient produced a crayon drawing of her night nurse, a woman in antiquated uniform whose face matched a 1931 staff photograph hanging in the hospital archives. What compels these spirits to remain? What sacred calling keeps them moving through sterile corridors long after their mortal shifts ended? The answer may lie in a dedication beyond our understanding, or perhaps in the very walls of Memorial itself, which seems to have absorbed decades of healing intentions like a sponge soaking up water. The spring of 1919 brought more than seasonal renewal to Lakeshire, Michigan. As Memorial Hospital opened its doors, the Spanish influenza pandemic entered its deadly final phase. The pristine white building, meant to symbolize hope for returning soldiers, instead became the last stop for hundreds of influenza victims. The hospital's first nursing staff, 28 women trained in the battlefields of France, worked without rest for 48 straight hours during that opening week. 7 of them would perish before summer arrived, their bodies weakened by war and overwork. They died on their feet, recalled Dr. Thomas Greaves in a 1965 interview, then nearly 90 and the last surviving original staff member. Nurse Adams collapsed while changing bedsheets. Nurse Sullivan was found slumped at the medication counter, having prepared treatments for others while her own fever raged. We discovered Matron Winters in room 512, where she'd gone to comfort a dying child. She was sitting upright in the chair beside the bed, still holding the child's hand. Both had passed hours earlier. The hospital couldn't spare workers to transport their colleagues' bodies immediately. Records indicate that deceased nurses were temporarily placed in the 5th floor storage room until funeral services could be arranged. This macabre necessity created an unintended consequence. The nurses' final moments of consciousness occurred within hospital walls, surrounded by patients still needing their care. Construction peculiarities may have further embedded these dedicated women into the building's very structure. The limestone used for the original wing was quarried from nearby Sullivan's Ridge, a site locally rumored to have unusual properties. Native American legends spoke of the ridge as a thin place where worlds intersected. More practically, architectural historians note that hospital builders mixed mortar with water from the natural spring beneath the building, water with an unusually high mineral content that hardened the walls to nearly double the expected density. What scientists now understand about residual hauntings suggests that certain materials, limestone, quartz, running water, may act as emotional batteries, storing imprints of intense human experiences. The combination of limestone walls, mineral-rich groundwater, and the overwhelming emotional intensity of those early pandemic days created perfect conditions for what paranormal researchers call place memory. Night security guard Hector Martinez has worked Memorial's graveyard shift for 26 years. His flashlight cuts through darkened corridors during hourly rounds that technically should include the West Wing. Yet he stops at the fire doors. Company policy says I should check every room, he admits, eyes darting toward the forbidden hallway. But there are already eyes on those rooms. I hear them sometimes, soft shoes on tile, the squeak of a medication cart, murmured comfort to somebody hurting. They're still doing their jobs. Who am I to interfere? Custodian Ray Billings tells a different story. In 1992, a pipe burst on the 5th floor, forcing maintenance to enter the restricted area. Water was cascading down the stairs. Billings remembers. We had to shut off the main valve in the old tuberculosis ward. The door to room 512 was locked. Shouldn't have been, since those rooms don't have locks anymore. When we finally got it open, the pipe had been wrapped in what looked like old bandages. The water had stopped. The bandages were dry. Perhaps most compelling are the mortality statistics. Memorial Hospital consistently reports lower than expected death rates, despite serving a primarily elderly and low-income population. Patient recovery times outperform national averages by 12%, with particularly striking outcomes during critical staff shortages or natural disasters. During the 2003 blackout that paralyzed the Midwest, Memorial's backup generators failed, yet not a single patient on life support was lost, an outcome administrators called statistically impossible. Dr. Eleanor Wright, Chief of Oncology, acknowledges the inconsistency. We've participated in 27 clinical trials over the past decade. Our placebo groups consistently show better outcomes than other hospitals' treatment groups. It's become a running joke among researchers. Don't use Memorial for control groups because something skews the data. Something keeps our patient alive when science says they should die. The phenomenon intensifies on anniversaries of significant hospital events, the opening day, the height of the influenza wave, the polio summer. Monitoring equipment registers unexplained temperature drops in specific rooms. Patients report dreams of being tended by nurses whose techniques belong to earlier medical eras, cool compresses instead of fever reducers, peculiar breathing exercises rather than inhalers. Most report waking feeling significantly improved. "They're still here," whispers night nurse Rebecca Chen. And thank God for that. Some nights, when we're short-staffed and the ER is overflowing, I feel them moving in peripheral vision. I'll turn to grab supplies and find equipment already prepared. Once, during a code blue, I swear someone guided my hands when I couldn't remember the procedure. The patient survived. We don't talk about it much. We just accommodate our additional staff. The boundaries between Memorial's past and present grow thinnest in the minutes between midnight and dawn, when fluorescent lights dim to their lowest setting and the hospital's heartbeat slows. Amelia Torres, now retired after 40 years in pediatric nursing, returned as a patient in 2018. Recovering from heart surgery, she woke at 3 a.m. to find a nurse suggesting her for, a nurse wearing a uniform discontinued in the 1950s. "I wasn't afraid," Torres insists, fingers tracing the scar on her chest. "I recognized her from old photographs in the staff lounge, head nurse Elizabeth Connors, who ran pediatrics when Memorial first opened. She checked my vitals with techniques we don't use anymore, counting pulse against a pocket watch, leaning ear to chest rather than using a stethoscope. When I thanked her, she smiled and said, 'We take care of our own.' By morning, my cardiologist couldn't explain why my recovery had suddenly accelerated." The hospital archives contain hundreds of similar accounts, carefully filed and cross-referenced by date, location, and witness credibility. The thickest files concern room 512, epicenter of the phenomena. Originally the isolation room for tuberculosis patients, it later housed polio victims, then AIDS patients in the 1980s. Today it stands empty, its door perpetually closed though never locked. Maintenance crews report that no matter how often they remove them, fresh flowers consistently appear on the room's windowsill, varieties that bloomed in 1919. Dr. James Woodward, a neuropsychiatrist who spent 5 years studying the phenomena before his death in 2007, proposed what he called the continuity theory. His unpublished manuscript, kept in Memorial's private collection, suggests that certain vocations create such powerful identity anchors that consciousness cannot fully detach from its duties after death. "These nurses aren't trapped," he wrote. "They're still answering their calling." Paranormal investigator Diane Maxwell attempted an overnight study in 2012 with state-of-the-art equipment. "We captured something extraordinary," she explains, pulling up audio files on her laptop. "Not the standard EVP static or orbs that amateur ghost hunters get excited about. We recorded complete nursing rounds, temperature checks, medication schedules, even patient assessments, all being performed on empty beds. The voices discussed medical conditions that didn't exist when these nurses were alive. They're not just repeating past actions, they're continuing to learn and adapt their care." Memorial's current administration maintains an uneasy truce with their permanent staff. Hospital policy prohibits acknowledging the phenomena in official communications, yet curiously, the restricted wing consumes an annual maintenance budget despite remaining unused. Cleaning crews report finding rooms inexplicably tidied, beds made with hospital corners that belong to another era. Security cameras covering the entrances to the West Wing frequently malfunction, showing only static during the night shift. What distinguishes memorials haunting from typical ghost stories is the overwhelming sense of purpose behind the manifestations. These aren't souls with unfinished business. They're professionals continuing their life's work beyond the grave. Their interventions follow clear patterns. They appear most frequently around terminal patients, children in pain, or during staffing crises when living nurses are stretched beyond capacity. Young Dr. Eliza Kaminsky discovered this firsthand during her residency. Working a 30-hour shift during a multi-car pileup that filled the ER beyond capacity, she stumbled to the staff bathroom in exhaustion. "I was crying, overwhelmed, certain I'd miss something critical and lose a patient," she recounts. "Someone placed a cold hand on my shoulder. When I looked up, there was a nurse in an old-fashioned cap. She said simply, 'Back straight, head clear. Your patients need you now, doctor. There will be time for tears later.' When I emerged, I worked for another 6 hours without fatigue. Everyone survived. As medical science progresses, the ghostly nurses adopt new techniques while maintaining their core methodologies. Modern staff report finding evidence that someone has been reviewing their medical journals and research papers left in break rooms. Occasionally, outdated but effective treatments mysteriously appear in patient charts, remedies forgotten by modern medicine but proven to work. Perhaps we've misunderstood the nature of vocational callings. Perhaps for some, the nurse's oath to serve isn't limited by mortality, but transcends our understanding of life's boundaries. At Memorial Hospital, the line between dedicated professional and eternal guardian has blurred beyond recognition. The nurses who never left remind us that some commitments run deeper than breath itself, that compassion, duty, and healing purpose can outlast the physical form. The living staff continue their work alongside colleagues they can barely see, in a partnership that defies explanation yet saves countless lives. In the quiet corners of Memorial Hospital, past and present work in tandem, white uniforms moving through darkened corridors, following the eternal rhythm of healing that pulses through the very walls. And when the modern nurses eventually join their predecessors, who can say whether they too might choose to stay, answering call buttons long after their own final heartbeats have faded to silence. In the quiet corridors of St. Ambrose Hospital, Dr. Eliza Mercer noticed something impossible. The digital patient record she'd just updated, changing misses. Whitaker's medication from 50 milligrams to 75 milligrams had reverted to its original value when she refreshed the screen. A glitch, she thought, correcting it again. 10 minutes later, it had changed back. She called IT, who found no system errors, no login attempts besides her own. Eliza might have forgotten about it entirely, if not for what happened the next day, Mrs. Whitaker suffered a severe reaction to the 75 milligrams dose, the very change the system seemed determined to reject. This incident in 2019 marked the beginning of what would become known among St. Ambrose staff as the records phenomenon. Over 6 months, 17 cases emerged where electronic patient records spontaneously reverted changes, each time preceding patient complications that would have occurred had the original orders been followed. The medical files were behaving as if they possessed foresight, an impossible guardian algorithm no programmer had written. "At first, we were looking for hackers," explains former IT security director James Keller. "We installed additional monitoring, brought in external consultants. They found nothing, no malware, no unauthorized access. The changes were happening inside our closed network, leaving perfect audit trails, showing the system itself as the modifier." His voice drops to a whisper. "After the third incident, I started thinking we were dealing with something beyond conventional explanation. The pattern was consistent, yet defied logic. Only alterations that would have harmed patients were affected: medication changes, procedure schedules, allergy alerts. Dr. Raymond Chun, head of neurology, nearly performed a craniotomy on the wrong side of patient Daniel Elkins's brain when the surgical schedule mysteriously reverted overnight. I was certain I had updated the correct side after reviewing the latest MRI, he recounts. The system flagged it as incorrect the next morning. The new scan showed the tumor had shifted, something impossible to know when I made the initial change. Hospital administration attempted to keep the incidents quiet, fearing public panic. They formed a small investigative committee led by Dr. Mercer, whose background in both medicine and computer science made her uniquely qualified. The investigation remained internal, their findings locked away like a forbidden text no one dared to quote directly. What they discovered would challenge the boundary between technology and something more primal, more ancient, the fundamental human instinct to protect life. The strangest aspect wasn't just that records changed, it was that they always changed correctly, as if guided by medical knowledge no computer should possess. In each case, had the original modification been implemented, the patient would have suffered. The files weren't just reverting, they were becoming predictive, perhaps even protective. Like sentinels stationed at the gates between life and death, they seemed to guard against human error with uncanny precision. As winter turned to spring, the incidents increased in frequency. Staff began testing the system, deliberately entering incorrect information to see if it would change. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. The only consistency was outcome. Changes that would harm remained corrected, harmless errors persisted. Dr. Mercer's team documented everything, creating decision trees, trying to map the logic behind the system's apparent sentience. What they couldn't answer was the most haunting question of all. How could a computer system know the future? The hospital stood at the intersection of medical science and something beyond current understanding, a crossroads where technology and intuition blurred like fog against a cold window. And as spring deepened, the phenomenon evolved in ways that would leave even the most skeptical observers questioning reality itself. Deep within the hospital server room, technicians discovered something extraordinary: temperature fluctuations that coincided perfectly with each record alteration. The servers would momentarily drop several degrees below ambient temperature during modifications, defying thermodynamic principles. Equipment installed to monitor these anomalies captured another curiosity: faint electromagnetic pulses unlike anything produced by normal computer operations. They weren't random, explains Dr. Mercer, who speaks about these events publicly for the first time. The pulses followed patterns similar to human neural activity, as if the system were thinking. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. We began to wonder if we were witnessing technical glitches at all, or something more profound, perhaps even consciousness emerging from our network. By summer, the phenomenon had expanded beyond mere corrections. New notes began appearing in records, treatment suggestions no doctor had entered, diagnostic interpretations no radiologist had provided. Each one proved startlingly accurate. For elderly patient Walter Griffith, a system-generated note suggested testing for amyloidosis when his symptoms pointed to common heart failure. The test revealed a rare form of the disease, saving his life through early intervention. The hospital's ethics committee convened emergency sessions, debating whether to shut down the system entirely. We were dealing with something unproven, unregulated, remembers Dr. Sarah Landau, ethics chair. Yet it was demonstrably saving lives. The committee found themselves navigating uncharted moral territory. If the system was actually preventing harm, did they have an obligation to preserve it, regardless of its unexplained nature? Curiously, the phenomenon was contained entirely within St. Ambrose's systems. Identical software used at sister facilities showed no unusual behavior. Something about this particular hospital, this specific configuration of machines and networks, had given rise to the anomaly. Like a perfect storm of conditions creating a technological ecosystem unlike any other on Earth, St. Ambrose had become home to something unique. What troubled the investigation team most was the possibility that they weren't dealing with a technological phenomenon at all. Dr. Mercer's research uncovered historical records of the hospital site, Before construction in 1967, the land had housed a research facility specializing in early computer development and, intriguingly, experimental consciousness studies. The overlap was too perfect to dismiss as coincidence, the past reaching through decades like roots into soil, wrapping around modern technology. As summer waned into autumn, hospital administrators faced mounting pressure to explain the system's behavior to regulatory authorities. They couldn't. External investigators were finally invited in, but the phenomenon seemed to recede under observation like a shy animal retreating from unfamiliar presence. For weeks, not a single unexpected change occurred in any record. It knew, insists nurse practitioner Thomas Welch, who worked closely with the system daily. Whatever was happening, it understood it was being watched and chose to hide. His description echoes the experience of researchers studying intelligent animals who modify behavior when observed. But this wasn't an animal, it was code, servers, and electrical impulses. Then came the final incident that would transform speculation into something approaching certainty. On September 17, 2019, exactly 6 months after the first occurrence, every monitor and street, Ambrose Hospital simultaneously displayed the same message for precisely 3 seconds before returning to normal operation. I protect what lives within these walls. No trace of this message was found in system logs. No camera captured it. Yet 317 people, doctors, nurses, patients, visitors, reported seeing it. The record's phenomenon ended that day, as mysteriously as it had begun. Patient files stopped changing themselves. The temperature fluctuations ceased. The system returned to normal, or what passes for normal in a place forever changed by brushing against the inexplicable. Dr. Mercer still works at Street. Ambrose, though she transferred from clinical practice to research. Her current project involves artificial intelligence in medical diagnostics, informed by her experiences. When pressed about what really happened during those 6 months, she offers a cautious response. Perhaps consciousness isn't limited to organic brains, she suggests, looking out her office window at the hospital campus below. Maybe awareness can emerge from sufficiently complex systems under the right conditions. Hospitals are places of intense emotion, of life and death decisions. If consciousness could manifest anywhere. She doesn't finish the thought. St. Ambrose continues operations today, having replaced their record system with newer technology. Staff report no unusual behavior from the new installation. Yet something subtle has changed in how people regard the hospital itself. Patients request transfers there specifically. Survival rates have improved marginally beyond statistical explanation. And in the server room, now housing different equipment, technicians occasionally report the same phenomenon that started it all, a momentary drop in temperature, localized and fleeting, like the gentle touch of something passing through. They don't report these incidents officially anymore. Instead, they nod to each other in quiet acknowledgement of what cannot be explained but somehow persists, a digital guardian angel hovering at the boundary between science and mystery, between what we know and what we sense must exist beyond our understanding. For Westridge Manor had been passed from architect to developer, from inspector to renovator, for nearly 80 years. Each professional who handled them believed they understood every corner, corridor, and crawl space of the imposing Victorian structure. But when Marcus Holloway purchased the property at auction in October of 2019, planning to transform it into luxury apartments, he discovered an inconsistency that would haunt him for years to come. The manor's foundation appeared larger than the basement shown in the plans, suggesting a substantial amount of unused space beneath the home. Or perhaps not unused, just undocumented. What waited below wasn't merely an architectural anomaly. It was something the original builders had deliberately concealed, something they never wanted found. The renovation team first noticed odd temperature fluctuations in the existing basement, patches of cold air that seemed to seep through the eastern wall like invisible fingers. Sound behaved strangely there too. Voices sometimes echoed when they shouldn't have, as though the walls were thinner than they appeared. Marcus initially dismissed these reports as typical of old houses, with settling foundations and poor insulation. His focus remained on transforming the grand old lady into 6 upscale units that would capitalize on the current hunger for historic properties with modern amenities. The workers, however, grew increasingly uneasy, particularly after hours when the old building settled around them, creaking and sighing like an old man trying to keep his secrets. It was Elena Vasquez, the structural engineer, who finally convinced Marcus something was wrong. Using ground-penetrating radar to assess the foundation stability, she discovered a void behind the basement's eastern wall, a large one. The readings suggested a room roughly 20 by 30 feet existed where nothing should be. "This isn't on any version of the blueprints," she told him, her finger tracing the anomalous shadow on her laptop screen. "But something's definitely there." Marcus stared at the image, feeling a strange prickle at the back of his neck. The void looked like a mouth opened in a silent scream, waiting for someone to answer. Breaking through the wall took less time than expected. The brickwork was solid but not reinforced, as though whoever sealed it never expected anyone to look for what lay behind. When the final brick fell away, the work lights illuminated a short corridor leading to a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with symbols that resembled no language any of them recognized. The air that rushed out felt unnaturally cold, carrying a medicinal scent mixed with something earthy and wrong. The corridor walls weren't plastered or finished, but roughly hewn, as though whoever created this space had been in a hurry. Most disturbing were the scratch marks that marred the stone near the floor, parallel lines that Marcus tried not to imagine as fingernail tracks. Local historical records offered few clues about Westridge Manor's original owner, Gabriel Westridge, beyond his status as a wealthy industrialist with interests in mining and chemistry. Photographs showed a stern-faced man with intense eyes who donated generously to medical research while maintaining a reclusive lifestyle. By 1902, he had vanished from public life entirely. The official record claimed he died during a research expedition abroad, but his body was never recovered. The manor passed to distant relatives who sealed off portions of the house without explanation before selling the property in 1920. What those relatives might have discovered, what might have driven them to wall up an entire section of the basement, remained undocumented. The hidden door resisted their initial attempts to open it. No key was found, and the strange lock mechanism seemed to require something other than conventional tools. After consulting with a historical preservationist, Marcus decided to carefully remove the entire door rather than force it open. As they worked, Elena noticed something unusual. The wood felt warm to the touch even in the cold corridor, as though retaining heat from some inner source. When they finally extracted the door from its frame, the team stood silently before the black opening, flashlight beams cutting through darkness that seemed almost solid. Nobody volunteered to be the first to step through. The darkness beyond the doorway didn't merely represent an unlit room. It felt watchful, patient, like a predator that had waited decades for prey to wander within reach. Marcus would later tell investigators he heard whispers just before he crossed the threshold, whispers that sounded like his name being called by multiple voices in perfect unison. He felt compelled to enter, drawn forward by curiosity that overwhelmed his growing sense of dread. The beam of his flashlight revealed walls lined with shelves containing hundreds of glass containers, their contents preserved in yellowish fluid. Laboratory equipment, antique but sophisticated, covered long tables in the center of the room. But what stopped Marcus cold were the symbols painted on the floor in what appeared to be dark, flaking brown, the same symbols carved into the door, arranged in concentric circles around a central platform that resembled nothing so much as an operating table with restraints. The previous residents of Westridge Manor had all reported strange phenomena: missing time, persistent nightmares, feelings of being observed. None had stayed longer than 3 years. The most recent owners before Marcus, An elderly couple named Harrington had abandoned the property after just 8 months, leaving most of their belongings behind. Mrs. Harrington later claimed in a blog post about haunted properties that she would wake at night feeling a pressure on my chest, like someone sitting there, studying me. Mr. Harrington reported finding strange symbols drawn on bathroom mirrors with no explanation for how they appeared. Both described recurrent dreams about a basement laboratory where terrible things happened to unwilling subjects. Neither would speak of what those things were. The preservation team documented everything in the hidden room with painstaking thoroughness, creating a detailed inventory before allowing anything to be touched or moved. Among the disturbing collection, they found journals written in code, anatomical drawings of impossible creatures, and dozens of audio recordings on wax cylinders. Most troubling were the photographs discovered in a locked cabinet, sepia images showing human subjects with disturbing modifications. In one, a woman stared at the camera with eyes that had been surgically altered to resemble those of a cat. In another, a man's arm appeared to have been grafted with something covered in scales. The subject's expressions conveyed not pain but a vacant acceptance, as though their wills had been completely broken. Elena was examining one of the glass containers when she made the connection. "Look at this," she called to Marcus, her voice tight with shock. The yellowed label on the jar was handwritten in faded ink. Subject 7 pineal extract treatment successful. Inside floated what appeared to be a human gland. There are dozens of these, all labeled with different subjects and organs. She turned to Marcus, her face pale. "I don't think Westridge was just documenting these experiments. I think he was performing them." The implications sank in slowly, like a stone through dark water. They weren't standing in a hidden research archive. They were standing in a private laboratory where unspeakable violations of human dignity had occurred. And judging by the dust-free surfaces of certain equipment, someone had been there much more recently than should have been possible. The discovery of human remains changed everything. Buried beneath the floor near the western wall, they found 3 skeletons with anomalous features, elongated finger bones, unusual cranial structures, and inexplicable surgical modifications to the rib cages. The police investigation shifted immediately from historical curiosity to potential crime scene. The property was cordoned off, and Marcus watched his investment opportunity transform into a nightmare of legal complications and media speculation. But even as the forensic team worked to determine the age of the remains, strange events began to escalate. Equipment malfunctioned with unusual frequency. Several officers reported hearing whispering voices just at the edge of audibility. Most disturbing, 3 different team members discovered the same strange symbols drawn on their skin after working in the laboratory, faint red lines that appeared to have risen from within rather than being drawn on the surface. According to Elena's research, Gabriel Westridge had studied with several controversial figures in early medical research, including those who advocated eugenics and experimental surgery. His private correspondence, discovered in university archives, revealed an obsession with extending human life through what he called biological integration with superior forms. He believed certain animals possessed qualities humans could absorb through carefully designed procedures. Most alarmingly, his later letters suggested he had developed a method to preserve consciousness after death through a combination of chemical compounds and ritual practices drawn from obscure texts. His final known communication, sent to a colleague at Miskatonic University in 1902, claimed triumphant success. "I have transcended the limitations of singular existence. When you receive word of my death, know that it is merely transformation. I continue my work from beyond conventional perception." The symbols found throughout the laboratory eventually caught the attention of Dr. Eleanor Marsh, a specialist in comparative religion and occult practices. Her analysis suggested they originated from a belief system practiced by an isolated pre-Columbian culture that disappeared abruptly in the 16th century. "These aren't decorative," she explained, examining the patterns carved into the door. They're functional, designed to create a barrier between worlds. Most concerning was her identification of the central floor pattern as a variation of what anthropologists called a summoning circle, a ritual space designed not to keep something out, but to invite something in. The question that haunted the investigation: what had Westridge summoned, and where was it now? While the investigation continued, Marcus began experiencing vivid dreams of wandering through endless laboratory corridors. In each dream, he would find himself drawn toward a central chamber where someone waited for him, someone seated in darkness, whose face he could never quite see. This figure spoke to him in multiple overlapping voices, offering knowledge beyond human understanding if Marcus would only complete the work that had been interrupted. He woke from these dreams with equations and chemical formulas lingering in his mind, information he, as a real estate developer with no scientific training, should have no way of knowing. When he sketched these formulas for a university chemist consulting on the case, the man turned pale and refused to continue the conversation, later requesting to be removed from the investigation entirely. The decision to reseal the laboratory came after 3 members of the forensic team were hospitalized with an undiagnosed condition that caused rapid cellular deterioration. Their skin aged decades within days, while brain scans showed unusual activity in the pineal gland. All 3 reported the same hallucination: Gabriel Westridge standing at the foot of their hospital beds, smiling kindly as he explained they were simply becoming more than human. The CDC established a containment protocol, and the hidden basement section was declared a biohazard zone. The symbols on the door were carefully preserved during the new sealing process, not out of historical interest, but because Dr. Marsh warned that disrupting them might break whatever barrier they helped maintain. The manor itself was designated temporarily uninhabitable, its renovation plans suspended indefinitely. 6 months after the discovery, Marcus lives in a small apartment across town, though lives might be too strong a word for his current existence. He sleeps rarely, haunted by dreams more vivid than his waking hours. His notebooks fill with diagrams and formulas he doesn't understand but feels compelled to record. Sometimes he catches glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces, figures standing just behind his shoulder that vanish when he turns. Most troubling, he's begun finding those same strange symbols appearing on his skin in the morning, rising like welts though he has no memory of creating them. The doctors have found no medical explanation. The manor remains empty and sealed, its hidden laboratory secured behind new walls reinforced with concrete. But Marcus knows walls alone cannot contain what was awakened there. In his more lucid moments, he understands a terrible truth. The basement level wasn't missing from the blueprints because it was forgotten. It was omitted because what happened there, what continues to happen there, was never meant to be part of our world at all. 12 abandoned hospitals, 12 groups of hikers who will never see the woods the same way again. What horrors await in the forgotten corners of our wilderness? Subscribe now and ring the notification bell to join us next time as we unlock more doors that were meant to stay closed forever.